You've probably seen this picture before, the roads of Colossus spanning from Cairo to the Cape Coast. It's a picture synonymous with the Scramble for Africa. But how come the Europeans, mostly the British, French and Germans, conquered so much land without any form of resistance from the native population? Europeans had their first trading ports in Africa for centuries prior to the Scramble, mostly on the West African coast, and with these trading ports they got their most valuable trade good, which were slaves. In the 1820s, a movement in the United States was focused on resettling African Americans in Africa, setting up an American colony in modern-day Liberia, and a couple of years later they issued their independence and would be one of the few nations spared from the Scramble. In 1882, the British occupied Egypt, a decade after the Suez Canal was built, and served as one of the major sparks for the European annexation of the continent. But why were Europeans interested in Africa? Well, the short answer is natural resources. Rubber, gold, diamond and oil were a driving factor for Europeans, and also that the majority of the continent before the 1890s weren't up to the European levels of technology. Between 1884 and 1885, Otto von Bismarck called upon the European powers to discuss the future of Africa and carve up the continent. Leopold II is a name most people familiar with the Congo will recognize. He was the sole ruler of the Belgian Congo, and for his brutalities against the native Congolese, cutting off limbs if production needs weren't met on time. But when the major powers of the world found out about his abuse against the natives, he was stripped of his power over the colony, and the Congo was ruled directly from Brussels until its independence in 1960. On the other side of the continent, the Empire of Abyssinia, what is known today as Ethiopia, was under a lot of pressure, mainly from the British, French and the Italians. They had just sold a tiny strip of land to the French, hoping to deter an invasion, but the real threat was Italy. Italia had gained Somalia and Eritrea as part of the Berlin Conference, and wanted to exploit the Abyssinians' technological weakness with an invasion. But what the Italians didn't know was that the Abyssinians willingly asked for European firearms from the French in exchange for a tiny amount of their land. In their eyes, it was better safe than sorry. The Italians were getting more and more uneasy with the Abyssinians as they continued to westernize due to trading with the British, and in 1889 the Italians offered the empire the role of protectorate, but this was of course turned down by the Abyssinians. A war ignited between the two nations, and even though the Italians had a technological and military advantage, the Abyssinians came out of the war victorious, setting them as the second nation only together with Liberia to keep their independence in a time of mass colonization.